Hello, so here we are now discussing passage number 15. You know the drill, you solve the passage, then you and I go ahead and work on it together. So let's start. So please make sure that you pause and read this part before we move on. Okay, here is next. All right, so with that, here are our questions. So question number 1, please pause, solve it, use the seeker to refer to the passage, and then come back. Okay, here is the next one. Question 3. And finally, question number 4. Okay, so in case you have read it, let's go ahead and start now. So in 2006, the Met Art Museum in the US, man, the Met is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It is easily one of the most well-known museums world across, and that is because they happen to have close to 2500 pieces in that museum, and majority of those pieces are like, instantly recognizable. Paintings of old masters and 19th century European art, absolutely amazing. You've seen that painting, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. That's there. Madame X, that's there. So the Met, very famous. So in 2006, the Met agreed to return the Euphroneus crater, a masterpiece Greek urn. Oops, sorry. So what do you mean by an urn? So see, an urn is a container, especially a large round container that happens to have a stem at the bottom. You use it for decorative purposes, or there are urns where you have a lid where you keep the ashes of a loved one that you lost. So that's urn. And if you've ever been to a hotel buffet, then you've noticed those cylinders, not cylinders, I mean those cylindrical shaped containers in which they keep the tea and the coffee. Even they are called urns. We call them the tea urn and the coffee urn respectively. So there was a particular urn which was considered a masterpiece of Greek art. It's called Euphroneus crater. Here, have a look at it. This is what we are talking about, right? So this was returned, and it had been a museum draw since 1972. Basically means that it was one of the major attractions in the museum since 1972. So it drew in a lot of people. Okay, in 2007, the Getty, now another art museum in the US, agreed to return 40 objects to Italy, including a marble Aphrodite. Okay, Aphrodite in Greek mythology was the goddess of beauty and love. So a marble statue of her, obviously. So agreed to return 40 objects to Italy, including a marble Aphrodite, in the midst of looting scandals. And in December, Sotheby's is a private auction house. So Sotheby's and a private owner agreed to return an ancient Khmer statue of a warrior. Okay, Khmer is basically a it's an ethno-linguistic identity, okay, a cultural and language-based identity of people who are typically found in Cambodia. These people are called the Khmer, and their language is also known as the Khmer language. And Cambodia had a very nasty dictator between 1976 and 1979, Pol Pot. His regime was called the Khmer Rouge regime, and it is very notorious in history. You can look it up. So Khmer statue of a warrior is basically a statue of a warrior from Cambodia belonging to that Khmer tribe group. pulled from auction 2 years before to Cambodia. So this entire paragraph talks about 3 instances where the art was restored to its original country that it came from. Cultural property or patrimony laws limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source country's territory. Now see, basically if you talk about a large part of the world, you know, whenever people went to a new place, a new country, they brought back souvenirs. They bring back souvenirs, right? Now, in the past, there are times when you brought back a souvenir which was part of the cultural history of that particular place. And it was considered okay. In a lot of these cases, those pieces were looted and smuggled and brought back, whatever. Now, how do you ensure that these cultural artifacts are not looted or transferred outside of the country? So that's where these patrimony laws come into picture. These patrimony laws, they're also at times called heritage laws. They vest the ownership of the cultural property to the country. So we say that if it is found in the country, it will be considered the property of that country, and therefore nobody can really export it or really purchase it. So it in a way tries to reduce the supply of cultural artifacts in the market so that the country can retain what is an essential part of its past, right? So cultural property laws or patrimony laws limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source country's territory. So it has happened with quite a few countries with a rich history, you know, Greece, Italy, Turkey, quite a few places in Africa, even in India. So they limit it, including outright export prohibitions and national ownership laws. So outright export prohibitions is you cannot export it at all and it will remain under the ownership of that country. So most art historians, archaeologists, museum officials and policymakers portray cultural property laws in general as invaluable tools for counteracting the ugly legacy of Western cultural imperialism. So they believe that these laws are useful in preventing the theft of their artifacts. So during the late 19th and early 20th century, an era former Met Director Thomas Owing called the Age of Piracy. American and European art museums acquired antiquities by hook or by crook from grave robbers or souvenir collectors. So basically, they somehow managed to bring those artifacts in their collection, including using shady measures. Okay. So grave robbers, people who dig graves and then take out antiquities, souvenir collectors, bounty from digs. So you know those archaeological digs where you dig in order to discover some archaeological place. So bounty from digs is things that you've basically taken from those places, and ancient sites in impoverished but art-rich source countries. Patrimony laws were intended to protect future archaeological discoveries against Western imperialist designs. I surveyed 90 countries, the author, with one or more archaeological sites on UNESCO's World Heritage Site list. So he went to 90 countries. What was common among all those countries? Every country, each one of these 90 countries has at least one site which the UNESCO has declared World Heritage Site. For example, I live in Delhi NCR, so we have Humayun's tomb, which is a UNESCO heritage site. And my study shows that in most cases, the number of discovered sites diminishes sharply after a country passes a cultural property law. So far we are talking about the benefits of those patrimony laws. But now the author here says that the moment a country passed a patrimony law, the number of sites of archaeological importance that got discovered became very low. So the number diminished sharply. Let's see. So there are 222 archaeological sites listed for those 90 countries. When you look into the history of the sites, you see that all but 21 were discovered before the passage of cultural property laws. So some facts to support it. So basically 201 sites were explored before cultural property laws came into place. And when these laws were enacted, after that only 21 more sites were discovered. So steep reduction, yes. Strict cultural patrimony laws are popular in most countries, but the downside may be that they reduce incentives for foreign governments, non-governmental organizations and educational institutions to invest in overseas exploration, because their efforts will not necessarily be rewarded by opportunities to hold, display and study what is uncovered. So obviously, people who invest money, even if they are genuinely motivated by their passion for the history, they would still want that, okay, if I've invested money, I should at least be allowed to show that discovery in a museum respectfully. But because that's no longer possible because of these laws, they have stopped putting money there. To the extent that source countries can fund their own archaeological projects, artifacts and sites may still be discovered. The survey has far-reaching implications. It suggests that source countries, particularly in the developing world, so basically third world, poor countries, should narrow their cultural property laws. So narrow basically means that they should reduce the scope. So they should allow some of those things to happen that they prohibit so far, so that they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries, which typically increase tourism and enhance cultural pride. This does not mean these nations should abolish restrictions on foreign excavation and foreign claims to artifacts. So he's saying that it does not mean that you say that, okay, if you want to come and dig, come and dig. You want to take these artifacts, take these. No, he's saying that you can still have restrictions in place. You may still decline foreign claims of ownership, but you may allow certain things. So China provides an interesting alternative approach for source nations eager for foreign archaeological investment. 1935 to 2003 restrictive laws. In those years, there is only one significant archaeological discovery. Okay, it occurred by chance in 1974 when peasant farmers accidentally uncovered ranks of buried terracotta warriors, statues of warriors made using mud, basically, which are part of Emperor Qin's spectacular tomb system. Qin, China, is named after, the country is named after him. He is the first ruler, first sovereign ruler. Now, in 2003, the Chinese government switched course, dropping its cultural property law and embracing collaborative international archaeological research. Since then, China has nominated 11 archaeological sites for inclusion in the World Heritage Site list, including 8 in 2013, the most ever for China. So somehow, when the restrictions went away, they made it easy for China to go ahead and discover more and more places. So yeah, absolutely. So let's start. So from the passage, we can infer that the author is likely to advise poor but archaeological rich source countries to do all of the following except. So what is it that he will not advise? So let's see. A, to find ways to motivate other countries to finance archaeological exploration in their country. Yes. So narrowing down of their cultural property laws. Allow foreign countries to analyze and exhibit the archaeological finds made in the source country. Yes, he'd be okay with it. Adopt China's strategy. He's given this as an example. And defund institutes in other countries to undertake archaeological exploration in the source country. They are poor. They don't have money. So if they are the ones who are funding, why can't they then do it themselves? Why would they fund someone else to come here and dig? Their problem is lack of money. So D goes beyond the scope of the passage, and therefore D should be our answer. So once again, this is the paragraph where you have that relevant part. Right? So if you put it in this context, in this particular context, then you know that A, B and C, that A and B are recommended. C comes from the China example anyway, and thus D it is. Here is your question number 2. It can be inferred from the passage that archaeological sites are considered important by some source countries because they do what? So there is only one part where it is mentioned, and that is so that they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries, which typically increase tourism and enhance cultural pride. So 2 utilities: enhancing cultural pride and increasing tourism. So which one of these basically gets it? A talks about tourism, and there is no option that talks about enhancing cultural pride, so you can eliminate the other 3 easily. So this is more of a specific detail question. Here is the next one. Which one of the following statements, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? Okay, So undermine essentially is weaken. What is the central idea of the passage? These poor countries are no longer able to make new archaeological discoveries because they lack funds, and the outsiders would not come in because of the property laws. So if they change laws, they can benefit. That's basically the essence, right? So let's see. Affluent, archaeologically rich source countries can afford to carry out their own excavations. This is consistent with the passage. If a country can afford, they can do it, and rich countries, obviously affluent basically means rich, they can do it. So this is consistent with the passage. It will support and not weaken. So let's rule out A. Museums established in economically deprived, archaeologically rich source countries can display the antiques discovered there. Yeah, they can, but then how does it tell us that that you don't need to make your cultural property laws / patrimony laws narrow, relaxed, irrelevant? C. Western countries will have to apologize to countries for looting their cultural property in the past century. Irrelevant. D. UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. Oh, now if this is true, then those countries no longer need to relax their heritage laws, patrimony laws. Why? What was the reason behind relaxing them? So that they can get the money to discover more archaeological sites. But if D is true, it means that they can get the money from UNESCO. So they don't need to attract those outsiders, and therefore D definitely weakens, and thus D should be our answer. Okay, question 4. Which one of the following statements best expresses the paradox of patrimony laws? So paradox is two contradictory things, or two seemingly contradictory things happening together. So what are those two seemingly contradictory things? If you check, there are certain advantages mentioned of patrimony law. It had prevented the looting, the piracy, the theft of a cultural heritage of a country. At the same time, the author says that so it was supposed to enhance those discoveries, but it ironically reduced those discoveries because of this reason, right? So which of these statements best expresses that paradox according to you? Let's check. They were intended to protect cultural property, yes, but instead resulted in the neglect of historical sites. No, it's not neglect, it is reduction in new discoveries. So this part is not right. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced business for auctioneers like Sotheby's. No, that is not the paradox. C. Protecting cultural property, but instead reduced new archaeological discoveries. Yes, so this can be an answer. Let's look at D. A and B are anyway ruled out, but instead resulted in the withholding of national treasure from museums. No, I think it's pretty obvious that our best answer choice here will be C. So that takes care of this particular passage, and here is something that I want to leave you with. Dark times lie ahead of us, and there will be a time when we must choose between what is easy and what is right. Now, for you, when you prepare, there are good days, there are bad days, right? In fact, the preparation has a habit of beating people down, making some days really tough. Perhaps you write a test and you score abysmally low. That is going to happen. But on that day, the easy thing will be to give it up, but the right thing will be to believe, to have belief in yourself and belief in my strategies, so that you are able to work towards that eventual ultimate goal. So said Dumbledore in Harry Potter. So J.K. Rowling, through Dumbledore, gave us this timeless wisdom. So that is it for this particular session. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay focused, and stay in touch. See you soon.